Hidden beneath the surface of many avoidants is a truth that most people never get to see. A truth so protected, so deeply guarded, that even years of connection are sometimes not enough to reveal it. Many people believe that if an avoidant stays in a relationship, if they keep calling, texting, or showing up, it automatically means they are deeply in love. But that belief misses one of the most important realities about avoidant behavior. An avoidant can remain close to someone while still keeping their heart behind walls that almost nobody is allowed to cross. They can share time, experiences, and even affection while silently protecting the one boundary they fear losing control over the most. And that is exactly where today's story begins. Because there is a line that avoidants rarely cross, a line that feels dangerous to them, a line that challenges the very survival strategies they have spent years building. Most avoidants are experts at maintaining independence. They learn to rely on themselves. They convince themselves they do not need anyone too much. They become comfortable carrying burdens alone. They often appear calm, distant, and self-sufficient on the outside, while fighting battles nobody can see on the inside. Yet when an empath enters their life, the entire equation can begin to change. Empaths have a unique way of seeing beneath the surface. They notice emotional shifts that others miss. They sense pain hidden behind silence. They recognize vulnerability behind distance. And sometimes, without even realizing it, they become the one person capable of reaching parts of an avoidant that have remained locked away for years. But reaching those parts is not the same as earning access to them. That is where the real mystery begins. In this video, you will discover the one line avoidants almost never cross unless their feelings are genuine and deep. You will learn why this boundary matters so much to them, what happens internally when they start falling in love, and the subtle signs that reveal they are moving beyond attraction and into true emotional attachment. We will also uncover why many avoidants become frightened precisely when their feelings grow stronger, why they sometimes pull away when they care the most, and how empaths often misunderstand the signals they receive. Some of these insights may completely change the way you view avoidant behavior and the hidden emotional world that exists behind it. Most importantly, stay with us until the end, because the final insight reveals the difference between an avoidant who simply enjoys your presence and an avoidant who has allowed you into the most protected part of their emotional life. That distinction changes everything. It explains behaviors that confuse so many people and reveals a side of avoidance that rarely gets discussed. If you enjoy exploring the psychology of relationships, human behavior, attachment styles, and the deeper truths hidden beneath everyday interactions, make sure to subscribe to the channel and join our growing community. And now, let's uncover the one line avoidants never cross with empaths unless they truly love them. One of the biggest myths about avoidance is that they do not care. People often look at their distance, their silence, or their tendency to pull away and assume there is no emotion underneath. From the outside, it can certainly appear that way. An avoidant may seem calm when everyone else is emotional. They may seem unaffected after conflict. They may need space when others want closeness. Because of this, many people conclude that avoidants simply do not feel as deeply as others do. But the truth is far more complicated. In many cases, avoidants feel just as deeply as anyone else. Sometimes they feel even more than people realize. The difference is not the amount of emotion they experience. The difference is what they learn to do with those emotions. While some people learned that connection creates safety, many avoidants learned that dependence creates risk. They learned that relying too heavily on another person can lead to disappointment, rejection, pain, or loss. Over time, independence became more than a preference. It became protection. It became a shield. It became the emotional armor they carry into every relationship. This is why avoidants often appear self-sufficient. They take pride in handling things alone. They solve problems by themselves. They process pain privately. They rarely ask for help even when they need it. To most people, this looks like strength, and in many ways it is. But hidden beneath that strength is often a deep fear. A fear of becoming too attached. A fear of needing someone. A fear of placing their emotional well-being in another person's hands. Because the moment someone becomes emotionally important, the possibility of loss becomes real. The possibility of disappointment becomes real. The possibility of being hurt becomes real. For an avoidant, those possibilities can feel overwhelming. So instead of risking vulnerability, they choose distance. Instead of expressing every emotion, they keep many emotions to themselves. Instead of depending on others, they depend on themselves. It is not because they do not care. It is because caring can feel dangerous. This is where many relationships become confusing. Someone may look at an avoidant and think they are cold. Meanwhile, the avoidant may be feeling 100 emotions they never express. They may miss someone deeply while pretending they are fine. They may care intensely while acting unaffected. They may think about a person constantly while convincing themselves to remain distant. Their behavior and their feelings often do not match in ways that confuse the people around them. That mismatch creates misunderstandings. One person sees distance and assumes indifference. The other feels emotion but hides it behind control. The result is frustration on both sides. Nowhere is this dynamic more powerful than when an avoidant meets an empath. Empaths tend to experience relationships very differently. They pay attention to emotional details. They notice changes in mood. They sense when someone is struggling even when no words are spoken. They naturally move toward emotional closeness. When someone they care about is hurting, their instinct is often to offer support. When someone becomes distant, their instinct is to understand why. They seek connection because connection feels natural to them. They are comfortable exploring emotions. They want honesty. They want depth. They want openness. At first glance, this sounds like the perfect balance. One person brings emotional awareness. The other person brings independence. But in reality, this combination often creates tension. The empath moves closer. The avoidant steps back. Empath asks questions. The avoidant becomes guarded. The empath wants deeper connection. The avoidant worries about losing freedom. Neither person is trying to hurt the other. They are simply operating from very different emotional systems. The closer an empath gets, the more exposed an avoidant can begin to feel. Not because the empath is doing anything wrong, not because the avoidant dislikes them, but because empaths have a unique ability to notice what others miss. They see emotional cracks beneath the surface. They sense sadness hidden behind confidence. They recognize fear hidden behind independence. For an avoidant, this can feel both comforting and terrifying at the same time. Comforting because someone finally understands them. Terrifying because someone finally understands them. That contradiction sits at the center of many avoidant-empath relationships. The very thing the avoidant secretly wants is often the same thing they fear. They want connection, but they fear dependence. They want understanding, but they fear exposure. They want love, but they fear vulnerability. As a result, they often find themselves caught between two competing desires. One part of them wants closeness. Another part wants protection. One part wants to open up. Another part wants to hide. This internal struggle can continue for months or even years. Yet there is a fascinating paradox that many people never talk about. Sometimes the empath becomes the first person who makes the avoidant question their emotional defenses. Sometimes the empath becomes the first person who feels safe enough to trust. The first person who listens without judgment. The first person who notices their pain without trying to control them. The first person who remains patient without demanding immediate vulnerability. Slowly, the walls that once seemed permanent begin to crack. This does not happen overnight. Avoidants rarely wake up one day and suddenly become emotionally open. Their trust develops gradually, often so gradually that neither person notices it at first. Small moments begin to matter. Conversations become deeper. Defenses become softer. Silences become more comfortable. The avoidant begins sharing pieces of themselves they normally keep hidden. Not everything. Not yet, but enough to signal that something important is changing beneath the surface. And this is where we arrive at the line. Avoidants never want to cross. Most people assume the line is commitment. They think avoidance fear labels, relationships, or spending time together. While those things can create anxiety, they are not the deepest fear. The real line is emotional dependence. That is the boundary avoidants fight hardest to protect. Emotional dependence means allowing another person's presence to affect your emotional world. It means turning to someone during difficult moments instead of handling everything alone. It means wanting comfort from a specific person. It means feeling safer because they are there. It means missing them when they are gone. It means caring about their presence in a way that cannot easily be replaced. For many avoidants, this level of emotional reliance feels incredibly uncomfortable, not because it is unhealthy, but because it challenges the identity they have spent years building. the identity that says, I can handle everything myself. An avoidant may enjoy someone's company. They may look forward to conversations. They may love spending time together. But emotional dependence is different. Emotional dependence means that person starts becoming part of their emotional support system. Suddenly, the avoidant is no longer carrying everything alone. Suddenly, another person's absence feels noticeable. Suddenly, another person's comfort feels valuable. And that shift can feel terrifying. For an avoidant, this is often the moment where feelings become impossible to ignore. Attraction can be explained away. Enjoyment can be explained away. Even affection can be explained away. But emotional dependence is harder to dismiss. It forces them to confront a reality they have spent years avoiding. They need someone, not in every area of life. Not because they are weak, but because they are human. This is why the strongest sign of genuine love often appears when an avoidant starts lowering these defenses. One of the first signs is that they begin sharing fears they rarely discuss. Most avoidants keep their deepest worries hidden. They may talk about daily events. They may discuss work. They may discuss practical matters. But their deepest fears often remain locked away. When they start revealing those fears, they are exposing parts of themselves they normally protect at all costs. Another sign appears when they stop hiding every struggle. Avoidants are known for carrying burdens privately. They often believe they must solve problems alone. They rarely want others to see them struggling. But when they truly care about an empath, they sometimes begin sharing challenges instead of hiding them. This may seem like a small change. For an avoidant, it is enormous. It represents trust. It represents emotional risk. It represents a willingness to be seen as imperfect. Then there is the moment they allow the empath to see their weaknesses. This can be one of the most difficult steps of all. Avoidants often work hard to appear capable and composed. Weakness feels vulnerable. Vulnerability feels risky. Yet when love becomes deep enough, maintaining that image becomes less important than maintaining the connection. Slowly, they stop pretending they have everything figured out. Slowly, they allow another person to see the parts they normally keep hidden. This is exactly why the experience becomes so frightening for many avoidants. From the outside, people often assume that love should feel comforting. They assume that when two people grow closer, everything becomes easier. But for an avoidant, genuine emotional attachment can create a completely different experience. The closer they become to someone, the more vulnerable they begin to feel. And vulnerability is not always interpreted as safety. Sometimes it is interpreted as danger. This is the inner conflict that many avoidants quietly struggle with. Part of them wants the connection. Part of them wants the closeness. Part of them wants to trust. Yet another part is sounding an internal alarm, warning them about every possible risk that comes with opening their heart. The result is a constant emotional tug-of-war. One side moves toward love. The other side moves toward protection. The reason this happens becomes easier to understand when we look at the emotional chain reaction taking place beneath the surface. Love creates vulnerability. Vulnerability creates uncertainty. Uncertainty creates risk. And risk often awakens fears that have been buried for years. The avoidant may not even realize these fears are active. They may simply notice that they suddenly feel uncomfortable. They may feel restless. They may feel overwhelmed. They may feel an unexpected urge to create distance. What appears irrational from the outside often makes perfect sense inside their emotional world. The deeper the connection becomes, the more there is to lose. The more there is to lose, the more protective instincts begin to activate. This is why some avoidants pull away immediately after moments of intense connection. A deep conversation happens. They disappear. A meaningful emotional breakthrough occurs. They become distant. A powerful moment of closeness is shared. They suddenly need space. To the empath, this behavior can feel confusing and even painful. It can create the impression that the avoidant lost interest. But many times the opposite is true. The connection became so meaningful that it triggered fear. The relationship became so important that emotional self-protection suddenly took over. The avoidant is not always running from the person. Sometimes they are running from the emotions that person awakened inside them. This is one of the least understood parts of avoidant behavior. Most people assume distance means a lack of feelings. In reality, distance can sometimes appear precisely because the feelings became stronger than expected. Caring suddenly feels dangerous. The avoidant starts realizing that another person has gained emotional influence over their life. They begin noticing that someone's presence affects their mood, someone's absence affects their thoughts, someone's approval matters more than before. These realizations can be deeply unsettling for a person who has spent years depending primarily on themselves. Many avoidants have built an identity around emotional self-sufficiency. They pride themselves on being strong alone. They value independence. They trust their ability to manage challenges without relying heavily on others. Then love arrives and quietly challenges everything they thought they knew about themselves. Suddenly there is someone whose opinion matters, someone whose absence feels noticeable, someone whose support feels comforting, someone they think about during difficult moments. This shift may seem natural to most people. For an avoidant, it can feel like unfamiliar territory. This brings us to an important distinction that many people fail to recognize. There is a major difference between love and comfort. An avoidant can enjoy spending time with someone. They can laugh with them. They can feel attracted to them. They can talk every day. They can even stay in a relationship for a long period of time. Yet none of those things automatically mean they have crossed the emotional line we discussed earlier. Comfort and love are not always the same thing. Comfort often exists within boundaries. The avoidant enjoys the connection, but still keeps complete emotional control. They appreciate the person but remain emotionally self-contained. They enjoy the relationship but continue handling every emotional challenge alone. The connection adds value to their life, but it is not something they emotionally depend upon. If the relationship ended, it would hurt, but their internal system remains largely unchanged. They continue relying on themselves exactly as before. Love begins to look different. Love starts changing the emotional structure underneath the relationship. The avoidant no longer sees the other person as optional emotional support. They begin turning toward them during difficult moments. They begin wanting their comfort. They begin valuing their emotional presence. They begin allowing that person into areas of life they once guarded carefully. The relationship stops being something they simply enjoy and starts becoming something they genuinely need. This does not mean unhealthy dependence. It does not mean losing individuality. It does not mean giving up independence. It means allowing another person to matter emotionally. It means accepting that connection is no longer limited to convenience or enjoyment. The person has become significant. Their support matters. Their understanding matters. Their presence matters. And that realization can feel both beautiful and terrifying at the same time. One reason this distinction matters is because many empaths mistake comfort for deeper emotional attachment. They see consistency and assume vulnerability exists. They see communication and assume trust exists. They see affection and assume emotional dependence exists. But avoidants can sometimes maintain relationships for long periods while still protecting their deepest emotional boundaries. The true shift occurs when those boundaries begin to soften. The true shift occurs when self-sufficiency stops being the only source of emotional stability. This is where empaths often face their greatest challenge. When they sense emotional walls, their instinct is frequently to help remove them. They want deeper honesty. They want deeper intimacy. They want emotional openness. Their intentions are usually sincere. They simply want the relationship to grow. But this desire can sometimes create pressure without realizing it. The reality is that vulnerability cannot be forced. It cannot be demanded. It cannot be rushed. It cannot be extracted through constant questioning. It cannot be created through pressure. In fact, pressure often produces the exact opposite result. The more an avoidant feels pushed, the more their defenses activate. The more their defenses activate, the more distance appears. This happens because avoidants are highly sensitive to feeling emotionally trapped. When they sense expectations they are not ready to meet, anxiety increases. When they feel their emotional pace is not being respected, they often retreat, not because they dislike the person, not because they do not care, but because their nervous system interprets pressure as a threat to emotional safety. Empaths sometimes make the mistake of believing that enough reassurance, enough effort, or enough persistence will eventually break through every wall. Yet emotional trust does not develop through force. It develops through safety. Safety is what allows defenses to relax naturally. Safety is what allows honesty to emerge. Safety is what allows vulnerability to feel possible. This is why healthy patience is so different from unhealthy chasing. Healthy patience creates space without abandoning connection. It allows trust to develop naturally. It respects emotional timing. It recognizes that genuine openness cannot be rushed. Unhealthy chasing, on the other hand, often comes from fear. Fear of losing the relationship. Fear of uncertainty. Fear of not knowing where things stand. The empath begins pushing harder for answers. The avoidant begins pulling farther away. Both people become trapped in a cycle neither of them intended to create. The strongest avoidant-empath connections are often built when both people understand this dynamic. The empath learns that vulnerability grows through safety rather than pressure. The avoidant learns that connection does not automatically lead to loss of freedom. Slowly, trust begins replacing fear. Slowly, emotional walls become less necessary. Slowly, the relationship starts moving beyond attraction, beyond comfort, and beyond convenience. And this leads to one final insight that explains why crossing this emotional line matters so much. Most avoidants spend years convincing themselves that they do not need anyone. Sometimes, this belief develops so gradually that it feels like a permanent part of their identity. They become accustomed to carrying burdens alone. They become accustomed to solving problems alone. They become accustomed to protecting themselves alone. Over time, emotional independence stops feeling like a strategy and starts feeling like who they are. That is why allowing someone to become emotionally important is never a small event in their life. It challenges years of conditioning. It challenges long-standing beliefs about safety. It challenges habits that may have protected them for decades. When an avoidant finally allows another person into that protected emotional space, they are taking one of the biggest emotional risks they know how to take. Every instinct that once told them to stay self-contained must become quieter. Every defense that once kept people at a distance must loosen its grip. Every fear that once demanded protection must share space with trust. And when that process begins, the relationship is no longer operating on the surface level. It is no longer just about attraction, chemistry, companionship, or comfort. It is moving into territory that many avoidants spend years trying to avoid. The territory where another human being genuinely matters, where emotional self-sufficiency begins to soften, and where the possibility of love becomes impossible to ignore. The strongest sign an avoidant truly loves an empath is not perfect communication. It is not constant affection. It is not endless reassurance. It is not how often they text, how many compliments they give, or how much time they spend together. The deepest sign is far quieter than that. It appears when they cross the line they have spent their entire life protecting. The line of emotional self-sufficiency. For most avoidants, independence is more than a habit. It is a form of protection. It is the place they retreat to when life becomes uncertain. It is the wall they trust when emotions feel overwhelming. So when an avoidant allows another person to become emotionally important, they are doing something that goes against years of instinct. They are allowing someone into a space they normally keep locked away from the world. That is why genuine love from an avoidant can look different from what many people expect. It may not always arrive with dramatic words. It may not always be expressed through constant emotional displays. Sometimes it shows itself in quieter ways, in trust, in vulnerability, in honesty, in the willingness to let another person see the parts they usually hide. Because when an avoidant begins relying on someone emotionally, even in small ways, they are taking a risk that feels enormous to them. And perhaps that is what makes it so meaningful. Anyone can enjoy someone's company. Anyone can appreciate attention. Anyone can feel attraction. But allowing another person to matter emotionally is different. That requires courage. That requires trust. That requires letting go of the belief that they must face everything alone. So if you ever find yourself wondering whether an avoidant truly loves an empath, look beyond the surface. Look beyond the stereotypes. Look beyond the assumption that distance always means a lack of feeling. Sometimes the biggest sign of love is not how tightly someone holds on. Sometimes it is the fact that they finally stop holding themselves back. And when that happens, when an avoidant lowers the defenses they once believed they needed to survive, they are offering something incredibly rare. Not perfection, not certainty, but access to the most protected part of who they are. If this video gave you a new perspective on avoidance, empaths, and the hidden psychology of relationships, Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more deep insights into human behavior, attachment styles, and emotional connections. And if you found value in today's discussion, take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this message, because sometimes one insight can completely change the way we understand the people we care about. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.